It's 11:48 a.m. on Thursday, the 15th of May, 2014. I'm Marc Strassman, reporter with Utopia News. I'm about to talk to Marc Cox, who's the founder of the New Energy Fund, LP. Welcome to Utopia News.
Thank you very much for having me, Marc.
Well, it's over 100 degrees here in Los Angeles today, and I'm hoping that the computer will be able to carry us through this conversation. What do you say the connection is between climate change and the need to move to new energy?
They are intimately linked to each other. I think it's an integral issue. Why? Because if you accept that carbon and methane are the reasons we're getting extra heat, and it does sound hot where you are, the places we're getting that from is from our regular energy, burning coal, oil and gas in transportation and electricity. And the more we can just get the energy without the carbon, the more the climate will start going away as a problem.
Tell us how the New Energy Fund is designed to facilitate that transition.
Right, now the fund, we started the fund off in 2003, and when we did it, it was actually the very first fund in the space, we thought. And then we discovered that a friend of mine, strangely, had started one in 1999. But the reason that we did it was, or the reason I did it at the time, was because I really felt that there was a real need to start supporting all of the new technologies that were working with solar, wind, geothermal, storage, transmission, anything to do with energy that could make it more efficient or zero emissions. And this idea developed into a memorandum which became the fund. And it took us a long time to get going because I think Wall Street's very cautious and conservative. But eventually, we found some people who were willing to risk $100,000, and within a year, we got $500,000 from Ted Turner. And so in 2005, we had a good year. Then in 2006, we had a 72% year, and suddenly everybody was throwing money at me. And by the time we got to 2008, we had $30 million under management. And we had a portfolio that was split between liquid big stocks like SunPower, Suntech, Vestas Wind Systems, those sorts of liquid items. And we had early stage technologies where the liquidity of the stock was maybe $1,000 of volume a day, 200 million shares, most of it owned by management, but locked up in a pre-commercial, let's see if this works, attempt to get a new kind of wind turbine out, a wind turbine, a solar cell that used copper instead of silver lead to pick up the electricity, which is much, much better. And there's a problem. The reason copper isn't used today, the reason it's silver on the front of all of those solar cells, is because silicon and copper don't mix. There's a thing called copper poisoning that comes from the silicon. So these people had figured out a way of putting in a layer of titanium just under the copper so that it didn't have the copper poisoning, but it was like one molecule thick electrolysis. And it worked beautifully. And then 2008 came, and suddenly companies like that were what the market loved to hate. No liquidity, unproven, not commercial. And yet, it was a 2% increase in efficiency in solar cells, which translated over a megawatt or 100 megawatts was millions and millions of dollars of extra efficiency and savings, and would have contributed to the thing we've seen anyway, which is the collapse in prices of renewable energy materials and equipment.
So where do things stand right now in terms of your investments? Where are you looking for the next opportunities?
Well, we have to be honest and say that after 2008, the fund came down in value, and today it's effectively zeroed out. It still has, as it were, a virtual portfolio of bankrupt entities that still have a patent portfolio and valid technologies, which are essentially, like so much in this space, waiting to be picked up again by people who've got a bit of money, who can try something out and get the understanding, the know-how back, and then implement it in the real world. So in the meantime, to pay bills, we've been working very hard at being an advisor to other funds, a consultant, getting networked in the industry. I'm a judge at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, as well as the New York Science Academy Forum, and in an annual competition in Monaco, next to Italy, and also in the Albany Nanoscale College of Engineering Forum business plan competition, which all of these competitions mean that one keeps one's eye on the prize, which is the technologies that are going to change the world. And meanwhile, with a bit of project financing work, we pay the bills. And so we're getting the best of both worlds, really. And we are aiming to start a new fund at the moment, which would be a $100 million vehicle, to invest in something very secure, which, if you're selling electricity and you've got an agreement called a PPA with a utility or a municipality, often those agreements hold over 20 years and sometimes 30 years. And that agreement locks in a price at which you sell your electricity. So we're very interested in being an equity holder in solar and wind projects or other kinds of projects. Part of a syndicate or a sole owner, and then, because the risk of the business affair of the arrangement is so minimal, it's safe to leverage it, and so you use debt to pay for the actual installation, but you own 100%, just like owning a house. You might own the house with only 10% down, and the bank would pay the other 90% of it. When the house goes up 20%, your 10% has virtually doubled or tripled in size because of that. And so we see this as a good way to get into the renewable energy world, because you can get these loans, fairly low interest rates. They're available from lots of socially interested funding sources like governments, sovereign funds, and other funding sources, many of them international. So, yep, so we're going to put together a fund aiming at about 100 million to involve ourselves with 5 to 20 installations and leverage it to get an IRR of about 15 to 25%.
Say a little bit about energy storage and what its role is in the emerging renewable space.
Just the other day, in fact last Sunday, May the 13th, the fourth largest economy in the world, Germany, at just between noon and 1 o'clock, 74% of all of the electrical energy being used in the nation was renewable energy. And this was because it was a fairly sunny day and the wind was blowing well, and they also had biomass and hydroelectricity, and the combined contribution came to 74%. What's that got to do with your question, you may ask? Because every day the cycle of demand and supply goes up and down like a roller coaster. The people who have to make sure, the utilities, that there's enough energy for everybody all the time, always make too much energy. Germany has a neat little deal where if they have excess energy, they can sell it immediately abroad. Now, the thing about Germany is, with so much wind and solar, which are intermittent, you also need to keep coal or gas operating in the background. And so although they've got 74% of all of their capacity coming from renewables, unfortunately, they have to keep about 10 gigawatts. That's almost a quarter of all of that working in the background so that they've got enough to cope in case suddenly the wind goes and the sun goes at the same time. It's approximately 43 gigawatts of solar and wind power, and about 10 gigawatts of biomass and hydro, all together represented about 74% of the demand on Sunday in Germany. Germany is the country in the world that is most advanced in installing storage. Now, storage, of course, is myriads of technologies. I'm writing a book at the moment, and we've got about 15 different types of storage. And that's including batteries, chemical batteries, about 4 or 5 different types of those as one entity. But there's a lot of chemistries that make batteries up, and a popular one right now is lithium phosphate that's becoming usable all over the place in transportation. But what they're looking for in storage is something that will hold a gigawatt and allow you to get that electricity out on demand. And so the German grid has got a mixture of things like compressed air, commonly referred to as CAES, compressed air electrical storage, and then you have these other storage mechanisms which are solid state, where you can have a very heavy weight and lift the weight, and then the weight, when you need the electricity, the weight will then push down on a hydraulic press and turn a turbine and generate electricity. These things are 85 to 90% efficient, and they never cycle away. You can always use them. They'll go on for millions of cycles if it's just maintained. So very useful for this sort of thing. But the Germans also have a lot of pumped hydro. Again, about 85% efficient. When the electricity is cheap, or when you have the electricity, or if you have electricity from wind that's not being used because it's nighttime and the demand is low, you simply pump water up to a lake in the top of a hill somewhere. And the head of water that you produce can generate, half a gig, a gigawatt, 2 gigawatts, and you allow that to run down when the electricity is needed and generate that power. It reacts very fast, and that's a very good way of doing storage, because unlike regular hydroelectricity, you're not worried about silt or the environment as much, because your reservoir is much more limited and there's no silt coming down a river. So it's a very interesting way to go. And then,
okay. Of course, so there are a number of technical ways of doing energy storage. What about the financial aspects of arbitrage, of buying energy cheap and selling it dear?
Well, of course, this is something a lot of people got their eye on, and there are places in America where you can buy electricity at 2 cents a kilowatt hour at nighttime, and the closest high-value market to you is where you would sell it when that market is acting. But a lot of the time, that's in the mid-morning. The industrial use of electricity climbs up, and so there's often 30 cents a kilowatt hour to be had, meaning that there's potentially a huge margin in some places. And on top of which, many states still count storage as part of their clean energy production quota, the RPSs that keep coming into question. And I think that this is a very exciting part of the future, where you could actually leverage that trading capability as a sort of PPA to pay for the installation of the batteries itself. And in fact, you brought that idea to us the other day, and we've been working on it.
Right. So talk about generally where you think the best investment opportunities in renewable energy are today.
The best investment opportunities right now are in a couple of places. I think storage has got a lot, because there's a lot of build-outs, and companies like Hydrogenics and ITM Power in the UK have got a lot of revenues beginning to grow on the back of storage. Hydrogenics and ITM Power are both electrolyzer manufacturers, and electrolyzers take electricity, that would be the electricity that's excess or cheap, and they use it to make hydrogen. And you can either add carbon from CO2 back into that hydrogen to make methane, or you can just use the hydrogen and compress it in a compressed air environment, and then make electricity from it again later when you need to. But your question was opportunities. So those two, this whole area of storage is a big opportunity in the market. We've got a really neat little one, which is a company called Alliance General Media in Florida that has a ticker ALLM, Alpha Lima Lima Mother, which has, for a media company, a bifurcated activity, and the other activity is the first time that human beings have ever put together a system, a technology that efficiently, cleanly, and cheaply turns cellulose into sugar. And so this company is able to do this. In 30 minutes, they can take, for example, oak sawdust and turn it into what they call C5 sugars and C6 sugars like glucose and sucrose and fructose. And those sugars can then be used to ferment to make ethanol or oils or many, many other products. Actually, many of the products that we already get out of a barrel of oil can come from fermented products in this way. It is so much cheaper to use this system to get ethanol and biodiesel and plastics and lots of medicines that this company has proven the technology. They're now building a pilot plant. We think within a year they'll have the metrics of the pilot plant. We already know what the guidance on those metrics is. And if you imagine that when you look at how much carbon is in the environment, and 4,000 billion tons of the world is the carbon that's in fossil fuels, if we could leave that in the ground and instead use the carbon, the plentiful carbon that is in vegetation, to make our liquid fuels for our vehicles. And let's face it, we're stuck with engines in cars and trucks and buses that are going to use liquid fuels for 21 years at least, because that's the cycle of the average car. If we can find cellulose going into liquid fuels through a system like this, it makes the entire transportation fleet carbon neutral right away. And these liquid fuels are drop-in fuels. They can be used in various cars with very few modifications. Of course, the Brazilians are in the lead with sugarcane ethanol. The Americans went backwards with corn ethanol. It was a crazy thing to do. Made food prices go up and made the world very nervous about using agricultural land or food itself for fuels. But this technology avoids food for fuels completely, and there's endless amounts of nature's commonest polymer, cellulose, that can be used for this. And this little company, ALLM, will, if it's managed properly, the management risk is there, I guess, but they're all very, very competent people with good pasts. I think this is one of the most extraordinary places to be right now.
Okay, good. Why don't you wrap up by telling us a little bit about your own personal satisfactions in working in renewable energy and what it brings you in terms of personal satisfaction?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that renewable energy brought me. I was a Columbia MBA, and I remember in the strategy class realizing suddenly that I wanted to be self-employed. What was I going to do? Well, of course, I was going to do renewable energy. It was like there was no choice. It was absolutely the most wonderful thing there could be. And the reasons were I had a completely clear vision that aiding the uptake of technologies in the clean area as fast as possible was the thing to do to help transition humanity from what is ostensibly and clearly, in fact, a non-sustainable environment towards a sustainable. Is like it's not only a noble thing to do, but it's potentially enriching. And so we've gone up and down in our fortunes, but we have always maintained a grip on the market and So one of my goals right now is trying to, a lot of people don't understand what's possible, how much energy there is there. And so I'm writing a book that just answers those questions as clearly as I can, which also lists with photographs and descriptions all of the different types of technology. So for solar technology, for example, we've got 25 different types of solar technology, 23 different types of wind technology, literally things like belts. You blow a wind over a belt, and the belt will vibrate, and you can have magnets on the belt that will generate a current at the edge. Very clever stuff like that. So we are very excited to have what you might call a coffee table book written for the layman, the man in the street, so he can get a grip on what's possible in this sphere.
Okay. Do you think we can make the transition fast enough to make a difference?
I'm an optimist, so I already noticed that one of the political parties in the US has changed its tune and become aware that humanity is making the problem come to a head. That it's us who's responsible for climate change. And so I'm pretty optimistic that if we can do that, we can get everybody to pull together and make things happen. But I'm also optimistic that clean products are now going to pour into the market. Better fridges, the light bulbs from Cree. Now you can get a 100-watt light bulb. You can buy about 20 different models of electric car now, and you don't have to use your mains plug to plug them in and fuel them up. You can now get someone like LIPA, Long Island Power Authority, or your local utility, to install the solar panels on your roof that you can use to recharge your car for free in some places. So all of these things are beginning to take a bite out of the fossil fuel apple. And so I think it was Michael Liebreich of New Energy Finance, the Bloomberg arm for new energy, who said that if the private sector continues growing as fast as it is and employing all of these new technologies, which are now going through a phase of what you might call grid parity, then we will all be able to offset the worst effects of climate change and perhaps stay stable. Although there's also a piece of news that came out last week about the state of the ice in Antarctica that said that there is nothing that can be done about a minimal 10-foot sea level rise now, which is pretty sobering. They said it's a one-way street. That's going to happen over the next 100, 150 years. And that's our kids and our grandkids, you know, so we're locked into something pretty horrendous already.
So as H.G. Wells said, it's a race between education and catastrophe.
Yes, yes. Oh, thank you for that quote. I will go and find it.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for your work and for talking to us about it today on Utopia News.
Mark, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to participate. Thank you.
Okay, bye.